Hello, this is my third video on Noam Chomsky's Hegemony or Survival. And this is pages 21 through 30. Page 21 starts with Iraq basically being a test case and not really intended to be the final test. You know, it was like they were kind of testing the waters out to see if they could really get away with it. And sure enough, they basically did and have. It's still going on. And, as far as I'm concerned, it's probably going to go on for the foreseeable future until it's actually stopped. So they obviously had the strategy ready to go in Iraq. And the language used to justify it, as Noam Chomsky mentions numerous times, it was far too fuzzy and far too speculative, which is exactly how they wanted it. They wanted language that could be bent to militarily address any perceived threat, whether it was an actual threat or not. And they wanted it so that they wouldn't have to prove it either in a legal court or even in the court of public opinion. They just want to be completely above the law, above criticism, and they just want to be able to do whatever they want. And keep in mind, this wasn't written primarily to please Mr. Trump's America First philosophy. This was all before Trump became president, and it was a bipartisan thing. So all these pseudo-progressives out there who are defending their precious party and all that, and saying, "Oh, they're the alternative." Sometimes they even make it seem like they're anti-war. Well, no, that's not true. It's a fabrication. It's a lie. It's no better than the lies used to justify the Iraq War itself. And actually, if you think about it in the contemporary setting, who's passing Trump's military budgets and agendas? Who is helping to fund that? Well, that would obviously be a bipartisan effort as well, including the Democrats like Nancy Pelosi and, the rest, with very few exceptions. And this also wasn't done to court the president's respect for the values that American alliances hold dear, because if you look at the Iraq War, it actually alienated America from most of its allies. In fact, early in his campaign, Donald Trump had questioned certain long-standing military attitudes, which is why early on in his campaign, some peaceniks might have been hoodwinked into supporting him. Mind you, Trump quickly proved himself to be another dishonest and incredibly corrupt warmonger, but that was him choosing an already well-traveled road. So while, yes, we can blame Trump and lament his very existence and all that kind of stuff, it's not like there was no precedence. And on page 22, Noam Chomsky definitely addresses how world opinion has become essentially the second world superpower. And, a lot of people say that Russia's in the running now, or China, but really it's really all these oligarchs against the population, and they have the state sort of rigged against us, and it's all dominated by corporate interests. And that's one of the main reasons why we're seeing all these warlike attitudes and stuff promoted in the media, because it's actually, people are making big bucks off of it. Trillions of dollars in money goes into this stuff. So the other somewhat ironic thing, the Bush administration warmongers also claim to be devout Christians. So, again, you have to wonder, how does that work? Do they say, like, I believe that the unity of the earth is supreme, that God lives here, and this is his church, but let's drop bombs all over the place, shoot people up, lock them up, starve them of much-needed supplies with sanctions, and otherwise torture them. It's what Jesus would have done. I mean, who actually believes that shit? Well, apparently a fair number of Americans have done that and will continue to do so because critical thinking is in short supply. So how great is our God anyway? Is he comparable to the multi-trillion-dollar military budget? Also, what about the police budget? How would Jesus feel about the militarization of police and all the venom conservatives are spitting at protesters right now? Would Jesus tell you to simply ignore and disregard the protesters' concerns? Well, as one protester in Richmond, Virginia said, being a black man, a black individual, it shouldn't be a curse. It should be nothing but a blessing. But of course, a lot of people don't find it that way, and that's one of the reasons these protests are happening. The ultra-right wants you to believe that, oh, these are just troublemakers who were out there because they're indoctrinated by left-wing ideology. But I assure you that a lot of these people really would rather be doing something else. But they're pissed off. They see a system that rips people off, lies to them, just utterly destroys them in some cases, and it's unaccountable. Like these miscreants can do all kinds of crimes in the name of the law and get away with it and actually get celebrated. And it's pretty brazen. So that's why the protests have been happening to a large degree. And I would agree that in some cases, yes, the protests have been, out of control. Bad things have happened. But is it so bad that, we need 4 more years of Donald Trump? No. In fact, the main reason these protests are happening is because of people like Donald Trump. And that's something that people should really finally come to understand. If the system was considerably more legitimate in what it does and how it does it, I think people would see far less reason to actually be angry at it and to protest against it either peacefully or non-peacefully. And by the way, property destruction, even though I'm not really going to defend it as anything, worthwhile, but it's not the same thing as like just outright shooting and killing somebody. And hell, it's not even necessarily the same thing as punching somebody in the face or throwing them in prison. Smashing a window, even though it's not exactly some noble behavior, in my opinion, it's still not quite as violent as certain other things that people could be doing. And I ask you Christian conservatives out there, would Jesus tell that guy to shut the hell up? Who is out there protesting? Would he be like, shut up, you moron? I don't think the biblical Jesus would be that way. I think he tells people to actually love their enemies and stuff like that. But of course, good Christians can always selectively apply their biblical teachings, if they ever even look at a Bible at all. Half the time they just regurgitate right-wing talking points, and they just say, oh, that's my religion. Whatever this right-wing doofus has to say. In fact, I'm pretty sure Christianity regularly urges people who have been successful in their own journeys to help others in need, which obviously goes against a lot of Republican stuff anyway. I don't think Jesus would be like, oh, we have to keep making the rich wealthier. I think the biblical Jesus actually says some very harsh things about the wealthy. What is that? Some kind of talk about camel passing through the eye of a needle, that sort of thing. But here's another question. Is it celebrating how your God can really be a Messiah to callously disregard the poor and to drop bombs on people? Is that a way to celebrate us supposedly being a Christian country and all that? Again, it just doesn't sound like the Prince of Peace to me. But of course, we'll destroy people's lives systematically while pretending we're all good and noble people. And we're a Christian nation and blah 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 blah. Because it's all just a bunch of words and terminology you can throw around to justify whatever behavior you want. Anyway, on page 23, Noam Chomsky quotes Tony Blair, who is, of course, a self-professed Christian himself, who many regarded as George W. Bush's yipping lapdog. Blair also said America failing to bomb Serbia would have dealt a devastating blow to the credibility of NATO. So, I mean, it wasn't just about Iraq. We had prior examples of all this kind of crap going on. So, did it make NATO more credible? Did it make us safer? I think it made the world less certain, and of course, I would say also less Christian, if we're going to regard Christianity as a supposed religion of peace, right? So that leads me to wonder, what is missing from the existing arrangement here? Common sense and common decency? To put it lightly, it seems their understanding of the world may be deficient and requires improvement, especially when taking into account the elections. To put it honestly, these people in charge are simply terrible, and they would be in prison if the system wasn't hypocritical. Or at the very least, these kinds of leaders ought to be prevented from running anything ever again. I would say they should not even be head of a bowling league, let alone a goddamn country. So anyway, page 24, Chomsky notes how leaders like Bush, Clinton, and Blair hide under the cloak of moralistic righteousness, making themselves look and sound better than they really are. Acting cumulatively as Uncle Sam, they essentially tell the world, "You have no right to tell me what I can do. Have a nice trip straight to hell." It's almost as if he's part demon, this Mr. Uncle Sam, as the mythological figure has been called. Oh, what a perverted uncle we have. And page 26. Well, let me just say my thoughts that were inspired by this page. While the U.S. could condemn and kill someone like Anwar al-Awlaki and his family for his radical online lectures encouraging terrorist attacks, let's not forget what I noted in my previous video here on my channel, that the United States was actually directly involved in creating Al-Qaeda ideology to a shocking degree, in coordination with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan's ISI, their intelligence agency, during the 1980s and sometime beyond, including even creating a popular textbook used to indoctrinate children against foreign occupiers like the Soviet Union, and basically encouraging them to be more warlike and, more fervent in their ideology. Also, the idea of a CIA-backed Osama bin Laden is scandalous unto itself, but it apparently happened. Osama bin Laden was involved in the battle against the Soviet Union, supported by the United States. And I should remind everyone that U.S. support for Saddam Hussein also went all the way back to the Kennedy administration. It seems like these facts are scandalous enough, right? After all, isn't it ironic that because I opposed the Iraq War as it was going on, conservatives and Republicans would often accuse me of supporting Saddam Hussein and the terrorists, when it was actually the United States government that did far more to boost such people. I mean, somehow that irony is lost on these people. I don't get it. Like, it's right there. It's actually coming out of their mouths, basically. Like, a lot of these people actually don't even dispute the factual history that the United States supported these dictators and these terrorist leaders and such. But somehow it just doesn't compute how that means that the United States is largely responsible for the stuff that's going on with these people and these countries. It's interesting too that the fundamentally dishonest profession of spy seems to go full steam ahead. Besides the cartoonish image of spies ducking behind bushes to pilfer for the agency, you hear bizarre and laughably absurd expressions like the spy community, as if concealing your very identity, gathering secrets for the state, and putting a price on someone's head ever made for a perfect sense of community. Oh, what nice neighbors we have. They engage in espionage and they lie their frickin' heads off every second of their lives. And they're being dishonest and unscrupulous in all walks of life, just about. Their entire life is pretty much arranged on convenient lies and myths. Yet, hey, what a nice community. Meanwhile, as a sense of how free America can be, there have been plenty of cheerleaders for our ability to take people to undisclosed locations, then torture them to force confessions, possibly to crimes they didn't commit, as well as the continued use of solitary confinement. So yeah, we're such a nice Christian country, We're not a warlike people, unlike them over there. We're such good neighbors. We're so kind and loving and giving and so beneficent. We practically ooze an angelic nature. Give me a break. So by page 27, Chomsky references captives held at Guantanamo Bay, and it's hard not to laugh about that for me, because it's yet another example of just the United States doing what it wants while claiming to be such a virtuous place when we're really acting like a pariah, pretty much. So much of what we do is questionable under international law as well as domestic law. Plenty of our own laws are being violated. Constitutional ideas are just being thrown out, which is funny because Obama was supposed to be like a scholar of the Constitution, yet here he was undermining it throughout, basically his entire presidency. And it makes me wonder if they hand out constitutional scholarly degrees in Cracker Jack boxes or something. Like, where did you get this expertise from? I'm not seeing it. But anyway, one might note that the Geneva Convention's provisions offer many protections and prohibitions against cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and these are falling under the category of war crimes. But those only matter if people care. If they in fact celebrate real or prospective war crimes, if they see them as positive, international law doesn't matter, neither does your own domestic laws. Your constitution doesn't matter, it's just all window dressing, as the expression goes. And by logical extension, these same people probably wouldn't care at all about federal, state, or local law here in America, while they proclaim themselves to be all pro-law and order. So long as they're not the ones being detained at Guantanamo or the Bagram Air Base, it's fine. It's like you can be pro-war so long as it's not your house that's the one getting bombed, or your loved ones being sacrificed. It's much easier to support stuff when you're not directly affected by it. Of course, you needn't even be charged with any crime if these wonderful politicians and their deranged fans have their way, and sometimes they certainly have. Meanwhile, Reuters news service notes how it's still up for debate how a U.S. president could be successfully charged for high crimes and misdemeanors. That sounds like a tacit admission that, yes, the president is above the law. Hell, one need only recall Richard Nixon's wise words, quote, "Well, when a president does it, that means that it is not illegal." And yes, that was a president of the United States who left his office in disgrace, which frankly all of them should do pretty much. On page 28, Chomsky discusses the international rule of law as an overarching goal of policy, and how that's basically gone out the window thanks to the United States. While Chomsky doesn't spring to the defense of these principles that fervently, he does so in a roundabout way, suggesting they at least offer a tentative system of checks and balances. It's not like they have no basis or less basis than laws of the United States. In fact, international law could potentially prevent conflict if enough people recognize it as having valid functions. For example, with Trump's increased inflammatory rhetoric against them, America can reasonably expect to meet the challenges of China sometime in the future if people like him have their way. So, I mean, there's already talk about sort of a Cold War with China, initiated largely due to Trump. The U.S. Naval Institute News article that I'm referencing here is already predicting a conflict with China. They say, quote, "As the Marines reshape their force to take on the Chinese in the Western Pacific, some experts worry the new emphasis could leave the Marines fewer tools to operate in other parts of the world and fight different types of adversaries." End quote. As America continues to, quote, "gear up for a conflict in the Indo-Pacific region in 2030, one former Marine in the White House says, the restructured Marine Corps is not designed to be versatile. The Marine Corps likes to think of itself as a Swiss Army knife, but this will be a Swiss Army knife whose owner has ripped out a couple of blades because he doesn't think he's going to need them anymore." So, yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Kind of gives you insight into the mentalities at work. Like other lead-ups to war, this feeds on our leaders being provocative and potentially destabilizing. Then when they finally start an invasion, they can say, "We're all shocked. We all feel a real sense of shock and danger. We're grieving for the families and those who lost their lives," and so on and so forth. War, like mass shootings, has almost become boring by now, and you almost can't even blame people for being apathetic. After all, how many times can even sensitive people be shocked by tragedy when things keep happening like an endless set of dominoes? Add people who already lacked empathy, and you get a clearer picture of why this nonsense keeps happening. That and propaganda, of course. So this is admittedly anecdotal, but I once had a university class with a right-wing conservative who I occasionally see in others' Facebook comments. One of our classes just happened to be on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Now, even though you'll have to take me at my word, I remember his primary concern was getting out of class. He didn't seem to be mourning the loss, of all those almost 3,000 lives. He seemed to be more concerned about how it would affect him. And of course, a person like him more than likely wears events like September 11th on his sleeve. Pretending to be so proud of the military and all that kind of stuff. But really, in my experience, a lot of these people, it's like they're putting on an act or something. Like, maybe some of them do get emotional about it, but in a lot of cases, it just seems like they're trying to fit in. They're being chameleon-like, and they're getting a sense of being a normal maybe even saner person by adopting these right-wing stances. You know, they're it's a complicated thing to assess the mentality of another human being, but in this case, this guy really didn't seem to actually care. Like, I think I might have cared more about it, in fact, in some ways. Even though I'm like the callous left-winger and stuff. Well, I wasn't like a complete emotional wreck over the tragedy. I'll never forget that reaction when I see his posts now on Facebook, and where he pretends to be such a love it or leave it type while using 9/11 as a mere excuse to ditch class early. You know? Maybe I'm being unfair. I mean, you can go after me in the comments here, but I've had numerous experiences like this. Same thing with a lot of these conservatives who are like, "Oh, there's no racism in the system." Yet every time, you know, at every opportunity they get, they like to post these news stories about black people being violent that have nothing to do with police brutality. Yet they don't understand how that is kind of racist unto itself. You know, do you know what I mean? Anyway, I didn't notice any significant emotion in his response, and a lot of these people online, like, it's hard to say what exactly they're thinking or feeling because they're so insulated. It's like they're in a cult. So anyway, a lot of these same people are, of course, debunking COVID-19 and defending Trump against fake news and stuff like that. So, I mean, they're sort of like a dime a dozen at this point. And it's hard to actually understand their mindsets and their emotions because they're really full of contradictions. Basically at every turn. Like I said, they insist the system is not racist, yet they defend policies that most clearly are racist and Trump's language that is most clearly racist all the time. So finally, on page 30, Chomsky mentions how even the relaxation of sanctions against Iraq was rejected so long as Saddam Hussein was in power. And I remember that very well because it's like they just did not care about what the evidence actually was, and they did not want to have any leeway on it. It was simply, we're going to invade, we're going to have some flimsy evidence presented as a pretext, but you know, it's going to happen anyway. So, lest you think this was all just a W phenomenon, recall that Clinton's Madeleine Albright was once asked by journalist Leslie Stahl about the 500,000 children who died from the sanctions in Iraq and whether the price was worth it. Albright answered, quote, "We think the price is worth it." And she also stated later, like she had a messianic complex, quote, "But if we have to use force, it is because we are America. We are the indispensable nation. We stand tall and we see further than other countries into the future, and we see the danger here to all of us." Okay, that's definitely cult-like language. It definitely sounds messianic. And if you were a fascist leader, you would use the exact kind of rhetoric that she used in that instance. It's the same kind of talk any tyrant would use. Just replace America with some other word, and there you have it. And some people will eat this bullshit up like it was the tastiest ice cream. So anyway, I'm sure I annoyed some people with this talk here, but whatever, I'm used to that. I also have kind of a sore throat right now, so my voice might be a little scratchy. But anyway, I'm going to make another one of these relatively soon, whether you like it or not, so be on the lookout for that.